Hello and welcome to the Jim Ruff Show. Today my special guest is Joe Shirley, who has moved here from Seattle and is now living in Port Townsend. When I first met Joe, he came to my dynamic facilitation seminar about 8 or 9 years ago, I think it was.
2001. Yeah.
Oh, 2001, okay.
I think maybe two.
Okay. So, and Joe has developed a philosophy of psychology, of working with clients that it's really outside of, he really developed himself without reference, I think, to different technologies. And I was intrigued because I know that dynamic facilitation influenced this, and his whole systems design program influenced it, and he calls it feeling psychology. So
Right.
welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. So I want to hear about feeling psychology, and I'm particularly interested in how you see that in connection to some of the things we've talked about dynamic facilitation and other things.
Right, right. Well, yeah, the training that I did with you, the dynamic facilitation training, the work that you're doing with choice creating and everything is at least my understanding of it is there's a different attitude towards the inputs that people have into any kind of collaborative process that is very inclusive and welcomes no matter what's, like with the dynamic facilitation process, no matter what somebody contributes to the conversation, it has a place to go up on whatever the 4 different charts are, and there's a place, because it has a place to go, the person feels heard. Because it's up there, it gets it triggers thoughts in everybody else, and there's this bigger conversation that gets to happen because the pot is stirring with all the ingredients that are in it. Most of the ways that we have conversations, there's expectations about what's okay to talk about, how it's okay to talk about, and people's ideas and such get left to the side so that the pot that we're stirring isn't big enough to include everybody who's there. Is that
Nice, yeah.
Okay?
Nice description.
So feeling psychology is a little bit like that inside your skin. Okay, in one person, there are also many voices, and those voices, a lot of them, get shunned, pushed away because they're not allowed at the party of who you are and who you are in relationship to other people. We learn really early on that as children, that it's not okay to express certain things. And because when we're children, our feelings and our expressions are so tightly connected, we can't feel something and not express it when we're a child. We learn to control what we're feeling. And we learn to shut down those feelings that lead to expressions that get us in trouble, and try to promote those feelings that get the rewards that we want. And we develop this artificial relationship with our own internal environment.
So we deceive ourselves about who we are.
All the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a tragedy. And it's understandable how it came to be. I think that feeling is an area that's very, very difficult to study. We have this, now we have 150 years of the science of psychology. And in the beginning, William James was really interested in studying psychology from the inside, introspectively, was interested in feeling. But over a decade or two, there wasn't much coming out of that. Because, frankly, it's hard for me to share my experience of my feeling in a way that is objective, measurable, and amenable to rigorous study, to comparison of what am I feeling versus what are you feeling versus 1,700 other people, so that we can do a statistical analysis and understand what's going on.
Right, so we choose behavior instead of feelings.
Watson says, hey, let's study what we can actually observe, and duh, behavior is really easy to observe. So
Sure.
we had 50 years of behaviorism, and then Beck came along and said, hey, we can start to examine the contents of people's thoughts too and learn a lot from that and manipulate that as a way of getting the results that we want. So cognitive psychology had the next 50 years. And that pretty much leads us to now. And my hope is that that I've developed a new way of rigorously studying what we call feeling. And it's something I stumbled on by luck and preparation, I suppose. And when I discovered it, I knew there was something big here, okay? I used to be bipolar, okay? And I say that I used to be, because today there's no psychiatrist in the world who would say, oh yeah, this guy's bipolar. I have none of the criteria that mark that out. And yet, 20 years ago, I did. My life was pretty much of a wreck because of the extreme mood swings. My highs, I thought I was God, more or less, and my lows were month-long sit and do nothing and wallow in misery. And so I was very fascinated with why is that? What is going on? I felt this intuitive sense of there was almost like a predictable clockwork with how it would roll itself out, with the internal mechanism of some kind of this feeling and that thought process and this, and there was, I had a sense that there was something there to discover.
Like what would, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but,
yeah.
but like what would be an example of a
So I
trigger?
went into, I did a lot of introspection into my history, into my past, my relationship with my father and stuff like that. I did a lot of dredging up the past, a lot of introspection, a lot of kind of working with imagery and that sort of thing. But the day that I fell into this new world, I was just paying attention to what my depression felt like. I was laying in bed. It was a sunny afternoon like this one in the middle of, in Kalispell, Montana. And I had a sensation of a downward pull in my chest. And that downward pull seemed really significantly related to the feeling of being depressed. And I idly wondered, what would happen if that was the other direction? What if that feeling of downwardness turned around and was coming up instead? And just by trying that on, an as if experiment in my mind, what if it was going up instead? In that moment, my mood shifted. And it was not just a little shift, it was a dramatic shift. And in that moment, it was like, whoa, that's not supposed to happen. It's not supposed to be that easy to shift a mood. What's going on here? And that was 17 years ago. So the 17 years since then, I have been trying to answer that question.
It sounds to me it's similar to, but different than focusing, as I understand it.
Focusing is kind of a primitive version of the feeling state imaging that I've created. Okay, that first question of movement, which way is it moving, and if it were changed direction, what would happen? I developed a whole repertoire of questions that are based on our somatosensory capacity for imagery. So with a feeling, I will ask, where is it located in or around your body? Feelings aren't confined to just the skin. I'll ask about substance quality, texture, weight, solid, liquid, gas. I'll ask about temperature, color, movement, pressure, and sound. And when I ask these questions, an image starts.
So there's something feeling inside,
exactly.
Something you feel. Oops, I hope I didn't touch the mic. There's a feeling sense inside, and then you ask these questions of that sense inside.
Exactly. So focusing is more of that sense of the feeling, the whole of whatever it is that you're wrestling with. And then it inquires into, what would that want? It essentially asks, what would it want to feel? What's it want you to know? And there's a shift, a felt shift is what Jenlin calls it, in that feeling that moves you towards something that's generally better. This work gets very explicit with a specific feeling, captures the image of what that is, and then invites the image to shift.
So it gets very specific.
Yes.
Oh, tell me about that. How does
so, like, for example, a fear might be located in your gut. It might be a tight, hard rock that's cold in your gut, for example. Fear, a lot of times, is the structure of fear is often an encapsulated something that wants to get out. So inside that rock, that cold rock, might be a hot, molten liquid or something. So, and that might be my passion, but it can't get out right now, because if it did, bad things would happen. I'd be seen as inappropriate or something. Just like, I'm just making up an example here right now.
Yeah.
So very specific. The image gets very, very specific, and you know that it's the right one, because if you play with it and you say, well, what if it was, liquid instead of a solid? You go, no, that wouldn't be right. What if it was 75 degrees instead of 70? No, that's not the right feeling. So we have, the question is, why is that? Mm-hmm. And I don't want to get too far down that path right now, but our first consciousness was somatosensory, I believe.
Somatosensory.
Somatosensory.
Like sensing the body.
Sensing not just the body, but with reference to the body and all material things in our environment, our surroundings.
Okay.
So when you jump into a pool, you move in a completely different way than you do when you run across a field. Okay? The field, you've got a solid underfoot, and you've got air that you're moving through, and your body moves differently based on that material environment than it does when you're swimming in the water. Okay? We have this infinitely sophisticated capacity for sensing and imagining, both sensing and imagining our material existence. And that capacity is both inside our body and it extends beyond our body. So I believe that it's that capacity that's used to create the experience of feeling. Okay? Feeling is a little different than emotion. Mm-hmm. Emotion is a physiological response to threats or opportunities. And feeling is our way of bringing that to consciousness and serving it up. There's a researcher named Antonio Damasio who has really made that distinction in studies of the brain and pieces of the brain that are damaged, what gets missing. And it's very clear that emotion and feeling are two distinctly different capacities. And I believe, and this goes beyond the research, but I believe that feeling, the general structure that feeling is built upon, is our somatosensory capacity for both sensing and imagining our world.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I'm thinking of a question that someone posed once at a lecture. I think, when do you end? There's a you, and is it your hand that? Is it the stick that you're holding?
Right.
I mean, when is it that's not me? I mean, somehow.
Right.
It's and where does that go? And I think that's what you're saying here.
That's what I'm saying, exactly. Yeah. There are recent studies in something called body schema, where it becomes clear that if you pick up a hammer, your body no longer ends at your hand. Uh-huh. Your body, your sense of your body includes that tool. It's one of the things that enable us to be tool-making creatures.
Yes.
But I don't think it's something that's uniquely human either. So yes, and what I've discovered with feeling, this way of mapping a feeling and eliciting its detailed structure, it gives a way of studying, well, how does feeling work? What I just shared with you earlier about fear often being some container around something that wants to get out, is an example of the kind of detailed sophistication that you can get into studying the structure of feeling and how it works. Any given feeling does not ever exist in isolation. We have within us a set of 9 parts that are generating feelings all the time that create our experience of being ourselves.
You see 9 parts?
Yeah. So I've been able to actually go in and unpack and see the patterns between people and ask for what are the fundamentals. Because when you start mapping one feeling, you go immediately to what else is that person feeling? What else are you feeling? What else is there? And you start to see that there's a whole constellation of feeling objects that you are mapping, and bringing those to the surface, to awareness, is the first step. That's what is very much related to the dynamic facilitation process, is because these parts a lot of times have been kept out of awareness. You give them an invitation to step forward and reveal themselves, they like it a lot. And I have people say to me, sometimes clients, we'll invite a part to come to the table and to be mapped. And I go, well, it's about time. They'll say stuff like that. Yeah. And you discover there's these whole little committees that we have inside of ourselves. Each part has a unique function, a unique job of its own to do. And it needs to coordinate with all the other parts in order to activate yourself as a whole human being.
So can you go through an example, like how you would work with somebody and how that would affect them and what their issue might be or something like that?
Sure. Let's say you're my client, okay, and you sit down with me and you say, I have an issue with X. And I ask you to just talk about it for a little bit. For 10, 15 minutes is all it takes. And I generally take notes. And what I'm listening for the feeling words. I'm listening for, yeah, when this happens, I get frustrated, and then I start thinking, I'll never be able to do this, and out of that comes, I withdraw. I step away from the situation. So there we've got three different feeling states. We've got the frustration. We've got the sort of self-judgment. I'll never be able to do this. There will be a feeling attached to that. And then we've got the withdrawal. So in that example, what I've just given you, there was the first expression of using a word that we tend to label feelings with, frustration. There was something that a cognitive psychologist would call maybe a self-judgment. I'll never be able to do this. But connected to that is also a feeling, okay, that's different than the frustration, some sort of sense of lack of self-efficacy, unable to actually do and accomplish something that you want. And then the third thing is a behavior. I will withdraw. I will no longer participate in this thing that I was involved with. So just in that statement.
And there's a feeling associated with that behavior.
With that, exactly, yeah. Exactly. So what I find with this work is that every element of consciousness is predominantly, it's rooted, it's anchored in a feeling state, okay? And those feeling states can be mapped and invited to shift towards their ideal state. Every part, I mean, there's so much here.
Well, yeah, I know, and we don't have much time.
Exactly.
But I think we're doing good. So there's three, we've identified in this little mini example, three feeling states, right? Associated with different behaviors and...
Yes.
And
the self-judgment, the withdrawal, and the frustration.
Okay.
Exactly.
So then the next step would be...
the next step would be, okay, let's map those. So I would say, okay, now pay attention to that frustration. And if you were to say that the actual felt experience of that frustration were located somewhere in or around your body, where would you say that is? Mm-hmm. And you would locate it. You would say, well, it's up in my shoulders, or maybe it's in my chest, or I feel it mostly in my head, right? And the labels that we give feelings, frustration, anger, sadness, etc., are not indicative of how someone will actually experience those necessarily. Every feeling is unique. And this gives an opportunity for every unique feeling to be seen as such. So using this imagery lets it show up exactly as it's experienced by the person who's having it. So my ideas about what frustration should be are useless here. Okay? My attention is on you and your experience and on facilitating your awareness of that experience to come to the surface. Right?
Okay. So let's say I'm thinking of time here. I want to make sure we complete.
Right.
So let's say I get clarity about all three of those in terms of some kind of felt sense?
Right, so we would actually, I would take notes and everything that you said. You'd have a description of it. Let's say the frustration was tight, like steel across my shoulders, and hot and vibrating, a little bit trembling, okay? Let's just say it was something like that. And then so we would have an image for each of those, and we'd actually draw them. You'd have a visual image on an outline of the body about what those three feelings looked like, right? And just having that awareness would give you more choice about when you go into that situation, you might choose not to withdraw the next time. You might say, hey, okay, I know where that's coming from. I'm gonna try staying in here.
What do you mean you know where that's coming from?
You have a sense of the feeling as its own thing.
Yeah, okay.
All right? And it gives you more choice.
You identified it with a
exactly.
Body reaction. And
right,
stuff.
right.
You don't know where it's coming from in the sense of traditional
Sometimes you do. A lot of
Okay.
times you will get insight. Those that when you become more vividly aware of the feeling, you'll often go back to memories. You'll often understand the pattern much better. Okay? But then the next part is the interesting part. Then I invite you with that steel, that hot steel, I'll invite that image to shift. I'll say, so in a perfect world, if this part of you could choose to be anything at all, what would it want to be? I would say the temperature. Okay, so would it want to be even hotter or cooler? What would actually feel better? And just by asking that question, just the same way I asked of that original depression, would it want to be going up instead of down? And it shifted. Let's say it would shift to being cooler. And in being cooler, maybe it would get softer and it would turn into a fluid. And that fluid, that maybe a thick oil that would wash down your back or something like that. So it would be an ease. You know, the frustration might turn into something that was just ease. No matter what's going on, I can be at ease. Okay? And then the self-judgment might turn into I'm okay or something like that. Just going through the feeling itself, just inviting the actual felt sense to shift, the beliefs and perceptions automatically shift as well. That's powerful. Okay? So in working with those three parts, and if you were working with me, we would actually go further than that, and there would be a set of 9.
So you sort of start really with somebody has an issue that
Yes.
they're working with.
Right, right.
And it's some issue that they get integrated, they unpack it, and they tie it to their body, and you use the levers that you've created in the body to affect the feelings and the cycle that's naturally been, that would normally unfold.
Exactly. So what happens is, and I want to just add in, it's not really the body. It's our representation of the body and its environment. So feelings, many feelings actually extend beyond the body.
Yeah.
You know, if you think of spiritual feelings, for example, feelings of oneness, we can actually map those as well. And they tend to extend outside infinitely, all right? Feelings of connection or involvement with other people, a lot of times those feelings will actually be almost like cycling out into the world and back into us. There's a sense of a flow or a connection of some kind, right? There's very clearly a taxonomy of different types of feelings in their optimal state. That's part of what I've mapped out and really described in detail. But what happens is when we shift in the old state, in the old configuration, those feeling states, that frustration, the self-judgment, the withdrawal, they originally took that configuration earlier in your life, most likely, when that was kind of what was necessary. And those feelings were there to call your attention to the fact that something's out of balance. Okay? Now, they got stuck there because there wasn't anything you could do about it when you were 8. Okay? And so they kind of went underground and they became part of your personality. Right? So what we do when we're mapping, we actually bring that to the surface very explicitly with the actual felt experience and the structure of feeling. And we shift it so that it becomes unlocked. And each feeling, each part becomes free to be fully responsive, having an infinite range of possible feelings. So to actually respond to this moment as it is, rather than that moment 50 years ago as it was.
So the cycle that we got at age 8 or somehow adapted to is holding back all these individual parts of us.
Yes, exactly.
And so a lot of this is to release
Yes.
those individual parts so that they can be essentially autonomous or more thinking, more,
Exactly.
have more freedom.
Exactly, exactly. One of the things that happens to us when we are prevented from feeling something, or we're prevented from acting on a feeling that is meant to redress some imbalance, is we shut that part of ourselves down. We cut it off from awareness. Another part of us takes over and says, okay, it's not okay to feel that. So with that fear example, the fear part, that ball of solid, that hard thing that was encapsulating that liquid on the inside, that liquid on the inside was not okay to feel. So it had to be walled off, almost literally. And it's like that part of us became lost to us. It became a little bit dead.
So that walled off part that we talked about right at the beginning
Yes.
was a deadening.
Yes.
And what we're really trying to do is free up all the individual component pieces.
Is to bring ourselves fully back to life.
I see.
To re-enliven our feeling selves.
Yeah.
And the experience of doing this it's remarkable, okay? That first feeling that I did, that was just one feeling, and I shifted it, and it was this profound change, and it shocked me. But it wasn't until a year later, when I had figured out that feelings come in sets, that I worked with a set of 8 different parts. I didn't quite understand the 9-ness yet. But when I worked with that set of parts, these 8 different feelings, one of which was this completely disembodied feeling behind me, almost like the proverbial or archetypal shadow, okay, that wanted my death. This set was very much involved in the depressive part of my cycle. When I worked that, and I mapped all 8 of those parts, and I shifted it, and it became, all of those different parts entered a resourceful state. Then, at the end of that day, I didn't feel like the same person. Okay?
You weren't the same person.
I wasn't the same person. I had to get to know myself all over again over the following weeks.
Yeah.
It's a profound change.
Well, that's great.
And that's the kind of thing that my clients experience all the time.
Well, that's going to have to be our close, and I really think we did come kind of a circle. I mean, we covered as much as we could grab of what you're working on. We did, and my interest is enlivened, and I hope and suspect that that other people's interest is enlivened as well.
Thanks.
So it's Feeling Psychology. Is there a website that you want to say?
There's feelingpsychology.com.
Okay, feelingpsychology.com. So thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks.
Joe Shirley.
Thanks so much, Jim.